Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the Michigan Community Service Commission's one of our first free volunteer management training of 2026, and we're kicking it off with a really great topic called Mastering the Art of Volunteer Leadership. I'm Melissa Sherry, and I'm joined today with Katie Alexander. She is an AmeriCorps Vista with us, and she is helping me with the chat. Katie, do you want to hop in and say hello?
Hi, everyone. Like Melissa said, my name is Katie Alexander. Today I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in there and we'll make sure that they get answered for you.
Great, thank you. I couldn't do this without Katie. So, really glad that you're all here. Really glad Katie's here. It makes our life a lot easier when we're doing these. And so, she's handling the letting folks in and things like that and the chat. If you just joined us, please feel free to put your name, your organization, and the city that you're from. We'd love to hear from you. And just as a little housekeeping note, this is being recorded. I am going to send out the recording afterwards, and we have some follow-up helpers that will uh, uh, support our learning today. So with that, so just to give you a little more information about the commission and your speaker today, who is me, I have worked for the commission for this is going on almost 6 years. I can't believe it. But my entire career has been spent in volunteer management and helping nonprofits fulfill their goals and get closer to the meeting their vision of their organization, of where they want to go with their organization. And it was through volunteerism, through leadership, through nonprofit effectiveness training. So I think you're in good hands today. And certainly the commission, we provide a lot of resources to aid uh, individuals in finding opportunities to serve, but we also do a tremendous amount to recognize volunteers through the state. We have this great photo of our governor, our executive director, and on the other side of the photo, you'll see a man there. He is the chair of the commission, and then there's it's I believe it's the daughter and one of our Lifetime Achievement awardees from our Governor Service Awards this last year. It's always an incredible event, but the Governor Service Award submissions are available. I'll send that out to you. But just want to let you know the commission does all kinds of things. We help lift up those stories of volunteerism and support communities across the state through training, access to resources, grant funds, things like that. So, just to give you a little insight on that. And let's talk about our objectives today. So, we're going to do a little bit of work to understand what the core principles of volunteer leadership are. We're going to learn some tips on building trust with your volunteers and then within your organization, and then explore strategies for setting expectations and really bringing about clarity and the role of clarity in volunteer retention and engagement. We're going to talk about how we can strengthen our communication skills with our volunteers, and then we're going to discover uh, creative ways to make a positive volunteer experience. All those elements of inspiring and empowering and sharing a vision and leading change with our phenomenal volunteers. So, why does volunteer leadership matter? Well, volunteers, they do so much for our organization, but truly, when you boil everything down, volunteers exist in an organization and they're supported in an organization, ideally to amplify the organization's impact. It could be by cost savings. Small organizations depend greatly on volunteers to do the meaningful work of delivering services. It could be the impact of goodwill and brand in the community. It extends to so many different ways. but it should show you that your role as a volunteer management professional is so critically important. You are the cheerleader of the magnifying and amplifying team. So, strong leadership also boosts retention and strengthens the brand of the organization. I've been in organizations that really had a very strong commitment to volunteerism, thankfully, and it was well known in the community. That's the place to go to volunteer. And as long as that continues to be supported, that does align with their brand. And it was very much a part of the history of the organization. It was talked about throughout it was like weaved throughout the entire organization. And that is part of the culture. So, and then as you create systems to support volunteerism, having that clear structure also creates alignment. And that is one of our primary jobs is to create that clarity, create alignment, and having people moving towards a single goal. So, positive experiences that create long-term ambassadors. That certainly, when I talked about that with that brand, that certainly is part of that. People were really proud to be a part of that organization. And they were really proud to be able to share that they were a volunteer, and this is what they did. I think everyone wants that. And it certainly does a lot to, again, going back to that word amplify, amplifying the brand, what you stand for, what your goal and your purpose is. So, here's some tips about some great volunteer leaders. So, they inspire others to achieve and be a part of something bigger. I don't think I've ever met a volunteer who, once they first came into the organization, ever thought that they were going to achieve XYZ. And, we're all ordinary people. We all have skills, we all have talents. But if there's not a great leader to pull out those talents and those skills, then, we're all kind of gonna do what we're gonna do, and we're gonna bump along whether they stay or whether they don't, is to be seen. But great leaders, they inspire people, and they have a different mindset towards the and growth. They bring clarity to the vision, the goals, and the outcomes that really help tie back to people being able to achieve something larger than what they expected. Even maybe they doubted themselves, but you're providing the clarity, the vision, the goals, and the structure to make that happen. You also focus on mutual respect, respect for the gift that volunteers give of their time. It's the one thing we can't sell, we can't buy, we can't make more of. You're only given so much time, and what do you do with it? And how volunteers choose to spend it with you is evident in how you respect that time and that alignment that you create. So when you create alignment, they feel a part of the organization. They feel that cohesion to that community that's created. They feel cohesion and commitment to their roles and responsibilities, and they want to give more. And again, as I said, the growth mindset when it comes to the future, we're not always thinking in the like, oh, well, we got this, we've got this budget, we've got this grant, we can't do this, we can't do that. A great volunteer leader doesn't think like that. They think of growth. They think of what's next. How can we solve the next challenge? And how can we push the organization more into the future? So, just something to kind of set our tone for today. So, what are the core principles of volunteer leadership? First, volunteer leaders are meant to connect to purpose. You lead with impact. And another way to think about this is you lead with the outcome. And so that that involves things like when you're talking with a volunteer and you're asking them to do something. I need volunteers to stuff envelopes. Sounds very exciting, doesn't it? But when you lead with impact, you say, hey, we have an opportunity to have the best fund development campaign we've ever had. And this is the goal. We are going to be able to serve 1,500 new children if we do this right. And I need your help with this. And yeah, it's stuffing envelopes, but that's a whole lot different than saying I need 10 volunteers to stuff envelopes. So you're leading with purpose and you lead with impact and the outcome. You have a great respect for the volunteer's choice to serve. It's that sacred gift of time, as I mentioned. So their work is meaningful, it's impactful. You're helping them again connect to the purpose. And you're setting clear expectations for the roles and you're setting them up for success. So, one of the things that I always talk about is before you have volunteers coming into your organization or you kick off a recruitment campaign, you're ready for them. So, what are those clear expectations? So, the clear expectations are like, what are the boundaries? What is it? What are the rules of engagement? Like, how do you work in this organization? What is your culture? And how do people get things done? How do you normally work together? And so, really having a meaningful conversation about how are they supported, being clear about that. What is it that they're allowed to do? What is it that they're not allowed to do? I mean, even things like I'm sure this would be one. Uh, Speaking to the media without prior permission. So, a well-meaning volunteer may go directly to the media and talk about something, but is that in alignment? Probably not. So, having those clear expectations, helping them make sure that they're going to be doing the right thing. There are many, many times when we would bring volunteers in to speak on a topic, and because they were closest to the work, they knew the impact. They could tell the story from a different perspective than the organization. That's completely different than a volunteer going and doing it on their own without us knowing. That is, it kind of jumps the gun a bit and it creates some havoc usually. So those expectations are a good thing. Relationship before a task. I always say take care of the volunteer so they can take care of the work. And what that means is that anyone, like one of the drivers of like employee engagement is that someone cares about them. Someone knows who they are, that you're not just a number, that you have that relationship. It's very relationship based. So even the little things like, hey, last week you had to take your granddaughter. Um, you had to pick your granddaughter up from school early and you weren't able to volunteer. How's she doing? What's going on? Just knowing what's going on in their life, just the hello, the warmthness that you can provide, I think is those little things that add up and build that relationship before a task. Because I promise you, you get to know your volunteers, you care about your volunteers, you're interested in them, your relationship building, they will take care of the work and you will be in a role of facilitating it versus covering shifts. So, another way to look at that is the relationship before vacancies. So, think about it that way. Empower over control. It's sometimes there's things that we want control over, but the best thing to do, especially in times of flux and change, is empower. Give them power over their work, especially when things are closest to them. They know more about it than you do. And so those that are closest to the work should be involved in making changes to their work. And it's kind of that old adage, do something with them versus to them. It goes a long ways. recognition that feels personal, a thank you that's connected to an outcome. And I have a great example. I was in an organization once where we were expected to send out X number of thank you notes. And I would get these thank you notes, and they were the most ridiculous thing. And they talked about this when they were introducing it, that people would save these notes. And I'm like, why would I ever save this? But they weren't connected to the purpose. So I always would make sure, and this is really interesting because even before I was asked to do this, I sent out a lot of thank you notes, and I always made it personal. So here's an example. I had a lady that just did a phenomenal job. There was an older person who was really struggling to walk, and we had this long, long lobby, and they had a long ways to go. And I saw this volunteer had the person have a seat. She went and she got a wheelchair and took the person and really just engaged with them. They were like talking and laughing, and you would have thought that the way that they were connected, that they would have been long lost friends. And I asked her afterwards, I'm like, "Did you know her?" And she goes, "No, no, I didn't." And but that person felt so the person that was helped looked so timid and kind of like overwhelmed. And all of that went away once that person connected with them. And so I wrote in a note to her that, I hope that every volunteer has that opportunity to connect with our patients every single day when they're here, because what you did was something that she will always remember about her experience. And I just want to thank you for bringing that warmth and caring to your service, and keep up the good work. So making it connect to bigger things. And the bigger thing was we were doing all kinds of work on customer service and how do you improve the customers, or how do you improve that experience for those that we serve. And that was one of the most powerful examples. So making recognition feel personal, whatever it is. And it's not always just a thank you note, but it's ways that you make people, even on the spot, even formally, make it personal. Leadership that's focused on consistency, steadiness, and reliability. You know, things happen, and we need to build safety and trust for people, in part because one, people make mistakes. We're human, it's an error. Sometimes things just don't go the way we expected it. And sometimes, we do have to redirect. Sometimes we have to change course. Sometimes we have to implement big changes. But when those that we're working with understand that we have a certain way that we do things, and that it's safe for them to come to you with an error, with a mistake, to own up to it, to fess up to it, and that it is not a people to people problem, it's a people to problem issue, and it's reframed that way, then it takes on an entirely different meaning in that relationship. So if they know that you're not going to blow up at them, they know that you're not going to, it's not going to be personal. They know that there's steadiness in the way that you respond, and that they can trust you in terms of reliability, that you're going to meet your commitments, you're going to address this, you're going to help them. That's when they know it's safe. And so that leadership is important, that leadership quality. Creating a feedback loop. I don't know how many of you do this, but one of the things that I find is that it's so critically important, and you learn so much, and it does make your life so much easier when you create these continuous cycles of feedback. So when something comes up, a new idea, a new project, a new problem, a complaint, then open up those cycles of communication. Start talking with those that are closest to it. what can they contribute? How can we figure this out? I'm going to give you an example. We had the great toilet paper shortage, and it was not of the pandemic. We had, when I was in healthcare, I supported a lot of family lounges, and one of the most busiest lounges was our surgical lounge. Sometimes up to 100 patients a day going through there. Well, every patient has more than one support person usually, or you can count on at least one, right? And so they're funneling in and out of the surgical lounge sometimes for hours, and they're using the bathroom. And guess what runs out? Toilet paper. And so the great toilet paper shortage. And this was very distressing to the volunteers because the people would complain to them and they didn't feel like they didn't have the skills, they didn't have the access that they needed, they didn't have the resources they needed just to, give them some toilet paper. So as we talked about this and we talked about some of the complaints that we had from family members about the surgical lounge experience, again, it wasn't about the people, it was about the setup. So we worked with the volunteers and we had extra supplies of toilet paper, but when they reached in for that extra supply of toilet paper, they knew that was the time that they had to call, and this is where you call. This is how long it takes to get more put in there, and then you're always going to have a reserve. But when you reserve, and there was enough in the reserve that it covered all the stalls, right? So that worked really, really well. And what it did is it's a little thing, but it took a lot of conversation about it. And I don't mean a lot. I'm like, we had it solved in about 30 minutes, but really the volunteers told us what was happening in a way that we didn't know what was happening. What we knew was that they were frustrated. They felt like they weren't being listened to because, to their point of view, you call and in 2 minutes, your toilet paper should be there. It isn't DoorDash. That's not the way it worked. I don't even know if we had DoorDash back then. But what we were able to do is create some alignment with expectations and then everybody working on the same page. So that relationship loop, that communication loop does so much to help smooth out and create a consistent experience, not only for your volunteers who now feel empowered, but also for those that we're serving. And so this is another one, and I think this is one of the most important things we could do is building a sense of community versus coverage. So that community, I remember I had a lady, her name was Amiko, and she was just the sweetest lady. And she was so good at building a sense of community. One of the gifts that she had was that lady could bake anything. She was so talented. She could sew anything, she could bake anything, she could make anything. And she made people feel good. So when she would volunteer, she would bring in desserts. And one of the things that she would make, this was wild to me, and maybe it's not so wild anymore, but green tomato cake. And she would bring in her green tomato cake and she'd say, "Oh, would you like some?" And I'm like, I'm not sure." It was the best thing I have ever ate in my life. But she would bring something in and it would create such a sense of community with her fellow volunteers. And that actually one time I was out at their station and a man stopped me and asked me, "Hey, is she here?" And I said, not, no, not today. And I was a little leery of telling him anything. And then he introduced that he goes, "I go to an exercise class with her and she always talks about how she volunteers here. And when she comes to the exercise class, she always brings dessert. And we just have the best time. I never miss exercise class because of her." So this little lady has been building a sense of community around food and, bringing people together and inviting them in all over the place, wherever she goes. And I think I heard about two or three more other places where she does that. And it just absolutely cracked me up. But what I thought was so beautiful about it was that there was always that sense of community. People didn't want to miss out when they worked with her. They had the highest um, show up, retention rate, whatever, attendance rate, participation rate on their day, on their shifts. And I think she was the secret sauce. So look for those people, and whatever you do, build that sense of community. And then working on a continuous pipeline of talent. Always look to re-recruit and look for further ways to build those contributions in your organization. That's what we do. One of the things that I was asked in a previous role was to help reinvigorate their pipeline to board service through volunteers and through community people. And they said, we need younger people. We keep pulling the same people. It's just very homogenized. And we want it to look like the community that we serve. We want to bring in new perspectives. And that's what you do. That's what that pipeline does. And so re-recruiting, finding different ways to work with people, using your people like the amigos of the world, and how can you improve? How can you bring more people in? How can you help them do what they do best in setting that community? And you're the facilitator of it as a leader. So what motivates those volunteers? You might have all the great things in place with your leadership, but what motivates them? What's going to get them to come in? What's going to get them to stay? And there's a few key things: purpose and meaning. So I am going to give you a tool after this that has you take a look at your position descriptions, and you can use this rubric to decide how clear is it how this position relates to the purpose and the meaning of what we're doing. What is the meaning? What is the significance? If you can't articulate that in a position description or in an elevator speech to talk about what you're asking volunteers to do, maybe you should rethink that one, because you're not going to get people to stay. The community and the connection. This is one of the most strongest bonds that you can create, is that community and that connection. I've talked about this before, but when I was in healthcare, we had a gift shop, and all the gift shop volunteers wore a red smock. Well, this is sad, but when we would lose a volunteer to death, they would show up and they would say the red coats are here. And they would show up in masses wearing their red coats. And my mother died while I was working there. And it was just it was a, it was a rough time for me. But I do remember that from the funeral, that the leader of the gift shop shared it with everyone. I have a stack of cards like this from all of those people. And many who might not even be with us today, but they showed up at that service wearing their red coats. And my siblings were like, "What is this?" And they were like, "Oh," and it was really sweet because my mom loved the gift shop too. She didn't volunteer there, but she loved to shop there. So that was very sweet. And then that recognition and ability to grow. The recognition is really about how are we connecting with them and making it recognition personal, but also how are we doing it to help them grow? How are we doing it that helps give them more opportunities? Volunteers do need to be re-recruited. It seems counterproductive, but the more work you give them that really resonates with why they came and their purpose and their meaning and their connection, the more they're going to give to you and the more they want to be a part of the organization. And opportunities to use their strengths. It goes right back to that ability to grow. Um, I would do a lot for younger people to understand that they were coming to some organizations because they wanted exposure to that line of work. So I would recruit people to be volunteers for us, to tell them about their job. That was in healthcare. But you know what? I would also pick on the HR people. I would also pick on board members that would, talk about, like, what does that mean to be a board member? What does that mean to be um, a community member, a professional in the community, and to be able to give back. I would tap all kinds of people and I would use it to help recruit other volunteers. So I've done that in more than just in healthcare. But think about that. What kind of things do people probably want to learn about? And then do you have the people who could teach them about that and give them some exposure? So I love the Gallup surveys. I don't know if you know that. I used to do a lot of work on those in previous positions, specifically with They started a volunteer survey and a volunteer engagement survey, but they have employment surveys, and they came up. They've started this, and I was one of the first leaders that worked with them on their volunteer engagement surveys. But they have a few things that I think we always knew, but it put some data to it. So 9 out of 10 people report an emotional boost after helping people. So after they serve, they feel physically and emotionally better. Isn't that something? It's kind of like my husband says to me every time when we leave church, you know what? I feel good after church. It's the same thing. I feel good after I help someone. And then 42% of the volunteers who responded reported feeling a high level of community cohesion and they were motivated to lead, which is like leading a group, doing more for the organization. And what this really means is that when people feel a part of a community, they're more likely to step up and do more. And they found that this was several times higher than those people with a weak community connection. So, wherever we can find those people who are striving to connect with the community, we gotta grab them and we've got to bring them into the fold and get them going. People want to be a part of this. I, I've said this in previous trainings that volunteerism is the antidote to loneliness. Loneliness kills people. Isolation kills people. And this is the thing that will fix it. And so, tapping into those sources, like who comes across lonely people? Doctors, therapists, churches, sometimes um, service providers in terms of like Meals on Wheels, things like that. So think about that and get creative about how do you connect with those people. And then about 65% of volunteers said that they were more motivated to serve when they knew the people that they were working alongside. So that's like bringing your friend in and doing the amigo thing where you bring your friends in and you make friends, even if you don't know them before, that you build that sense of community. So most of the majority of the people, I mean, the vast majority of the people said that they're more comfortable. So let's talk about trust because trust is kind of like the foundation of leadership, right? And how does it grow? How do you build it? So it's the consistent expected practices. It's having those processes that are in place to make sure that people know what the cadence is, they know what to expect, they know that this is the way you'll react. This is written out. This is what's expected of us. This is how we operate, things like that. That transparency. So when there is a problem, hey, there's a problem here. We need help. I've been in organizations, not surprising that they've had financial difficulties. And one of the most powerful things I ever witnessed was when an executive said, you know what, we want to hear your ideas. We want to know, we don't think just because we're in these positions that we have all the answers. We need your help. And so here, this is how we are going to listen to you. This is how we want transparency. This is what's happening. This is what needs to happen. We just need your help getting there. That respect for time. So I've said this a few times, but if a position is not really connected to an impact, you can't make that connection. It just looks like busy work that nobody wants to do, then maybe you shouldn't do it. Being truly respectful of their time. And I've had invitations to create volunteer positions just to have somebody sitting there. And if you can't figure out what that person's going to do in a meaningful way, it may not be the best solution. So follow through. Leadership is all about the follow through. It's about making sure that when someone brings something to you, or that you're made aware, or even like that management by walking around finding those things, finding those glitches that are creating waste, and following through in a meaningful way on those things. It could be just the clearing of the debris to make sure they can do what they need to do. We would have a lot of these things where there would be a glitch in a computer system, and things just didn't work out well, or you have a great process but it hasn't really been well thought through, and you don't really know what's happening with that person. It's that kind of consistency and follow through to making sure processes are good, and that you're following through with that person, and that you have systems, even if it's not always you, that you have systems in place to make sure things and people don't fall through the net. And then, or the crack, sorry. Um, and then being open and listening to consideration and input from others. Again, that continuous feedback loop. But all of these begin to build trust. I had a time when I felt like I was doing this really well. And then all of a sudden, a project happened, and the timeline, everything was like changed, the goalpost was changed, everything was changed, and boom, you needed to have this done like now. And I remember the first thing thinking was like, I needed to take a breath, because I said, this is the way things will happen. We'll do this with you. We won't do it to you. And now I feel like I'm doing it to them. And the first thing I did was pick up the phone and talk to the leaders that it would impact the most. And I explained what was happening. And I talked to them about what would change, what would not change. And to the best of my knowledge, this is where things are. And I'm going to continue. This is how I'm going to communicate with you about updates and progress. And, much to my shock and surprise, it was fine. And I think it was because that trust was there, that basis, and they believed in me. And I said, if there's anything you could think of that will help us with this, please, do this, but we don't want it to be completely on your shoulders. This is what we're going to do to kind of smooth this so this can happen very quickly. But if there's something that I haven't thought of, I haven't talked to you about, please come back and talk to me about it. And they did, and but there was a lot of happiness, there was a lot of trust, and it was okay, even though it was not the way I wanted that change to happen, or I had even said that the change would happen. I was just honest about it. And it wasn't in an honest way that threw anybody under the bus, but talked about like what the impact was, what were the reasons, and how can we make this work. So let's talk about some practical examples of trust. And then I have a formula about addressing change. So I put this up here. Change is hard, decision making is hard, but it doesn't have to be. Um, you can choose to invest more work on the front end of a decision and include those that are closest to the work, or you can opt to just adjust the complaints once they happen, and make the decision without seeking input. I've done both in my career. I'm totally guilty of the latter. And I kind of kicked myself, and it was inexperience on my part. I'm just going to say that it was inexperience. I thought I was doing the right thing, but really I I could have saved myself a whole lot more work about engaging people on the front end and saying, "Hey, here's the challenge and I need your help." Um, Instead, I made the decision, and then there was a whole lot of complaints. even complaints, because they all talk, they were complaints from people from outside the area. I mean, literally, I would have kids making children of our volunteers talking to us about what had happened. It was the craziest thing. And it didn't even affect their loved one. I mean, it had nothing to do with their loved one, but they had heard about it. So again, involving the people who are closest to the work. And then I developed a process, and it just incredibly improved retention and engagement in relationships. So here's my formula. You ask, you align, you evolve, and you agree. So the first thing is, somebody comes to me with a complaint, and I say, "Oh, wow, that's important. I acknowledge it." And then the next thing I say is that I'm going to ask about this. We're going to address it. And I go to the folks that are closest to it and I ask, what are you seeing? I have data. Here's my data. Here's our customer feedback. What can we do about this? And a lot of times it is also a shared concern of theirs. I've never had it where they were completely blindsided by this. They knew that there was an issue. And oops, I'm sorry. I really appreciated that. And I've come to just expect that they're going to know because 99% of the time they do. So, what is the shared goal? We intend to address the changes as a team and to meet the needs of our clients. However you say it, that's it. We would take the extra step of saying, we are not making these changes for you. We're going to make them with you. We want to understand how this is going to impact your work with the goal that we improve our service for those who we serve. There's no reason why anybody would ever get upset with that. And it really shifted the dynamic of a problem of people versus people and people feeling defensive versus people versus a problem mind shift. And it gets everybody quickly on board. So a shared goal, how you intend to address it to meet the needs of our team and the needs of those we serve. So then when you do the next part, that's the alignment. When you do the next part, it's the involve. Ask them, how do we solve this? We might have ideas how to solve things. And, 9 times out of 10, whenever I would facilitate a project or I would take on a new project, I always had some goal in mind, like, oh, this is all I got to do. And then I look back and I think, wow, if I hadn't involved all those people, it would have been a totally different project. And I'm not a construction person. I've facilitated a lot of construction projects, including an entire retail and um, food venue in healthcare. I don't know anything about those things, but I do know how to facilitate. I do know how to get community input. And it was completely different than what I ever imagined. And it is so much better than anything I could have come up with because we asked, like, what are you looking for? What do you need? And what do you like? What do you don't like? And so asking others to help solve the problem, invite them to share ideas. And you know what? One of the most important things when I would ask volunteers to make a change is I would say, how would this affect your service? How would it affect your service? And then one, I've had people that have come back and said, it will affect my service. And I would always say, if this is going to affect your service, can I call you? Can I help you stay connected? That can happen for a variety of reasons. So, share and then share the summarized feedback. What I usually do is I'll lump it all together, and most of the time, I can get a wealth of 20 different inputs from people. And what I do is I'll summarize those into here's some buckets, and it provides an opportunity for us to create create actionable plans from that. And so we can discuss the conclusions and ask for a decision on feedback. And then once the change is made, checking to see how it's going. Most of the actions in anything are in the planning. Very little is in the doing, and then the checking afterwards and the consistent loop of improvements. So ask, align, involve, agree, and then you just move forward. So let's talk about setting clear expectations too. The clarity, as I've said before, reduces stress and increase volunteer confidence. I put this image on here because this is something I always say, like, could you imagine sending someone into a football game, a soccer game, and there's a whole team, they know what the play is, and you send somebody on your team who just as a walk on. I mean, they literally walked from the stands. They're going to go play. They are probably going to create chaos because they're not in alignment. They don't know what's expected of them. They do not know what they should be doing next. So that is why clear expectations, that's why coaches have practice. Clear expectations creates confidence and it reduces stress. So here's some tools that I've used that we have in our tool bag as volunteer leaders to help create that clarity. And it's probably a good idea to go back and take a look at these and make sure that these things are in there. But the orientation and how you're introducing your volunteers to your mission, vision, and values, verbalizing the culture and the behavior standards. What's expected? How do we do the work here? How do we treat each other? Those are all things that people need to know. And then the role descriptions and clear processes. That even includes visual workflow tools just to help people, just even if you have to muddle through it, you'd never send someone out to do a role without training, but people forget. They take a misstep. There's something that they can go back to reference to get back on track. And then the other thing is like, gosh, who to turn to, what to do when they don't know what to do. When something strange comes up, they get a question that, they're not sure of, or, you know, it's, we would have accreditation people in some of the jobs that I've had before. And the worst thing you want to do is try to make something up. It's okay just to take a breather and say, I'm not sure about that, but I do know where I can find the answer. And it was just a thing that, they can go here, they can go to my immediate supervisor. There's places that I can go to find out. And that was perfectly okay. Just don't make up an answer and don't try to connect the dots on your own because that's where mistakes happen. Time commitments, like being clear about what the time commitment is, the boundaries and the consequences. Unfortunately, things like patient or client confidentiality. What happens? Like I worked in a place, like what happens if you see a client outside of the organization? You don't acknowledge them, and they can acknowledge you, but you don't say how you knew them. And then what are the consequences? What are the consequences of things like um, um, smoking on campus or using a substance beforehand. What are the consequences of, not following your social media protocol? Being clear about what those things are. What are the success indicators? And like, what does success look like? Hey, you know what? We are trying to raise $10 million for this project, and we need your help. This is how you can help us. Those are the success indicators. Um, you know, Patient feedback, client feedback. If you have any quality standards, customer satisfaction, things like that. And, sharing those things and, celebrating them. And then it goes into the recognitions and the celebrations. I love celebrations and recognitions where we can empower each other, not only staff, but volunteers to recognize each other. And I've got some ideas for that I'll be sending to you. So, did you know, and I think this is really quite interesting, uh, a good indicator of volunteer retention happens in the first few months, and it's directly tied to the effectiveness of their onboarding. So, here's what volunteers appreciate: position descriptions that accurately describe the role, onboarding processes that show visual workflows, and clear tasks that help them understand the why, and a point person to go to ask for questions and advice. Volunteers who feel unsupported tend to lack a sense of community belonging. I have talked to incredible people that have so many skills and so much talent that any organization would just be like so happy to get them. And you know what? In organizations where they haven't well supported their volunteers, or they're filling vacancies versus working on those relationships, ooh, they have placed great people in roles where they're not well supported. And the people do something that I call a magic disappearing act, which I'll talk about more. But they just kind of slither away and they're embarrassed about it. And it really leaves a bad taste in a volunteer's mouth. They may not do it again because it wasn't good, it didn't feel good. But can you imagine they're retelling that story over and over and over again? And they're kind of embarrassed about it, to be honest. I've heard that so many times, and great leaders will not let that happen. So, and I know none of you will. So effective communication, I wanted to share this too, like the tone, the timeliness. Volunteers should expect a cadence to, whatever updates you do, whether it's an email, your visits, your rounding, which is just stopping by and visiting them, the check-ins, and then even meetings where, your little cohort gets together or your volunteers all get together, but they can meaningfully talk about their work that they do together. So there should be a cadence to that. And then your communications are always respectful, friendly, positive tones. I always worked really hard on this because of the fact that sometimes I think I've worked with people who felt like they were an authority, and then they would get into like a verbal, I don't want to say it, they thought they were being professional, but it felt very much like an attack. And I've seen it lots of times, able to stop it, things like that. But I really focused with my team on respectful, friendly, positive tones. And like, what happens when somebody comes to you and they're not that way? How do you stop it? And we had some visual cues to say, whoa, I think we need to take the tone down a little bit. I think we need to understand what's going on. There were some cues that we would use that would kind of stop everything. So, and usually I would say that there was um, a misalignment when that happened, a misalignment with what someone thought that they had like the authority to do. Good people, it's not a people problem, it's a problem issue. And so get it back on track versus being at people against people. And one of the way that it does that is that two-way shared decision making, and that conversations about how we're connecting, and then adapting to the audience. So adapting to the audience, it can be in any situation. I remember once walking into a room and I was brand new in this role, and I walked in and these people were so angry, and I just remember, like, what is going to go on? I need a game plan here. And I said, well, can I offer something here? And I said, I'm trying to understand what the challenge is. And in that, I feel like we need to take a step back. And so I had to take I had to take the kind of the bull by the reins here and reset the expectations. But one of the things that I said was that I care more about you than the work that you do. And the last thing I want you to be is unhappy. If you're unhappy in this role, I will help you find another one. And I remember I got back to my boss that in summary, that I told him to quit. And I said, I didn't tell him to quit, but nobody's going to quit. And I said, what they heard from me is that I care about them. I want to understand what their issues are, but be clear that in the end, what we're looking for is engagement. What we're looking for is people who are going to care for other people. And you can't care for other people if you're angry about something else. So let's work through that, but let's do it in a positive way together. And again, nobody quit. So did you know this is, I don't know how many times you give out information and you feel like, oh my gosh, did anybody even hear this? I have done this so many times. And instead of like embarrassing someone, now I understand, and I wouldn't embarrass anybody, but I understand now that people need to hear a message between 5 and 7 times before it resonates and it influences behavior. So repetition is needed, and it could be verbal, it could be written, it could be um, incorporated, it could be, played out in a lot of different ways and seen in a lot of different ways. So the first time it introduces the idea, it's not going to be clear to them. It's not going to result in any action, usually. The second or third time, it builds an understanding. Oh, we heard about this. Yeah, okay. And then the fourth time to the fifth time, it developed resonance that this message applies to me. And then the sixth and the seventh time is where action can start happening and it feels familiar, expected, and important to them. So keep that in mind, especially as changes are made. And, it's like every single touch point is one of these, like when we would usher in change or, talk about how something was going to be different or what we needed. So here's also a practical formula that we used for communications. And you've probably seen this before, but why, what, how, and check. So start with the why. This is the same thing as I said before. Start with the end result, start with the outcome, start with the impact, and it begins to create motivation. State what you need in clear, specific call to action. We need 10 volunteers to stuff envelopes. But it's not just to stuff envelopes because we're going to have the most amazing campaign we've ever had to be able to support X, Y, and Z. And explain how success looks. This this a project, we believe it will bring in $5,000 or whatever it is. I mean, numbers are important, but whatever that success looks like, and check for understanding. So, kind of how that can look. Um, oh, I'm sorry. How that can look is check for understanding. So, you're asking like, not only does that make sense because then people are automatically going to nod, but if you're talking to them, so are there any questions, or what questions do you have? Or is there any reason that you don't think you could do this? Or is there any part of this that might be confusing? It will really help us improve if I understand what I might have missed. And it's inviting them to say, it's okay that I don't know. And remembering that 5 to 7 times, chances are you didn't share it 5 to 7 times already. And so what are they doing? What is it that we're supposed to be looking for? So, what, why, how, and check. So here's some additional points to remove ambiguity from your communication. Use one message per sentence. First step, check guess in. locate name tag, invite them to join the event. Boom, boom, boom. Have you ever had someone ask you a question and they're asking you four things in that question? I remember being in an interview and thinking, I have no idea what this person is asking me because it was so confusing. I didn't know what to answer. So one message per sentence when you need someone to follow through on an action. Include time anchors in the instructions. Arrive by 4. Program concludes by 6. Give permission to ask. Again, this is the check. If anything feels unclear, please ask. It's helping us improve. Close with impact and appreciation. Again, going back to that impact and leading with that. But then when you close the loop on whatever it is that they did, because you helped at our event, our funders experience the same level of warmth and welcoming spirit that you give our clients every day. And you made this event very special for them. And I want to say thank you. It's sincere and it goes back to the impact and whatever that impact is. So I know we're kind of coming up on time here, but I got just a couple more slides. So setting the stage for a great volunteer experience. This is a picture of Linda, just something I found on the internet. But what I thought was so great, it was clearly somebody who has a vested interest in the organization. They've been around, they're getting a certificate of appreciation, they're getting some flowers, they're getting a certificate. How beautiful is that? But there's a whole lot that goes into that. And when you give that person their certificate and their flowers and you say, thank you for giving us 10 years. I've been in organizations where, believe it or not, they've hung around for 60 years, 50 years was pretty common. And the secret sauce to that was that sense of belonging. So, but there's a whole lot of work. And when you give that person that award, it's also you getting an award. Here's why. Because you set the stage for that volunteer to have a great experience and for that volunteer to be able to get to that point. It's kind of like when you graduate your kids from high school and then college and you're like, oh my gosh, I achieved this too. Maybe you don't take away from their achievement, but that achievement happened because of your support. And it's the same thing here. So, how do you get them to that point? Well, it starts with the little things. It's the warm welcomes. It's making people feel like they belong right away. And considering those little things, the parking, a secure place for their coat, their keys, their purse, they need to feel safe. When they're first coming in, they're not comfortable and they need a sense, you need to tick off those things of security and safety for them. Where do they check in? There's a lot of ambiguity. You got to clear those away. Like what do I do when I first come in? Who do I see when I check in? Who do I check out with? Do I even make sure anybody even knows that I'm here? Who do they come to with questions? What happens when a mistake occurs? And I've said this before about how mistakes are addressed. Do they have the tools to be successful? These are like the toilet paper, the great toilet paper shortage. Make sure they have their toilet paper if that's what they need to support the people that they're taking care of. Clear tasks. What do they do during a downtime? So they're not bored. And we would have them, I would have volunteers like have a whole list of things that they could do. And they were not like busy cleaning things. Sometimes they seemed like they were whatever, but they would be doing quality checks for things for us. Some of our volunteers would go look for safety issues and report them back. And our facilities team loved that. Had nothing to do with what they were doing, but they were geeked about doing it for safety. They were geeked about doing it to help people have a better experience. And it was furthering an opportunity for engagement and it kept them busy the whole time. And then the recognition and the feedback. And how can they grow and learn? I talked a little bit about that with the, motivating why people have motivations to come. What do they need to learn? How do they need to grow? How can they grow in your organization? And again, that sense of community and cohesion that we've talked so much about. So told you about the disappearing act when you get that great volunteer. I do call this the magical disappearing act, but did you know that volunteers fall off or disappear at key points in their relationship with your organization? And this might surprise you, but most volunteers are actually lost before, after they complete their application, but before their first shift. In my organization that I worked with, I was losing 60% of those people, 60. That is crazy. That was an entire staff person that had to put in a lot of time to go through those applications and try to, connect with them. So we shifted everything. So the first thing that we did is we made a personal connection with them. I had the friendliest person that would do this. They had like the greatest voice. It wasn't my voice, but they just had that kind of personality that would just bring you in. That's why I like them in the first place too. I like them. And so they would make that call and they would connect with that person. And it would seem so warm and sweet, like you just want to be a part of this. And that call would always happen within 48 hours after or less after they submitted their application. And there was a clear path to onboarding, an absolute clear path. This is your next step. This is what you're going to do next. And I'm so excited that you're here. And then after their first experience, um, the other thing, we lose them after their first experience, and that is because they felt like they didn't understand. It was overwhelming. It seemed like it was too much. I don't know. I've got to go do this. I've got to go do that before I can get there. And, you need a straightforward plan, a simple plan. And then again, at 3 to 6 months, the motivational plateau. And, I've heard this. And then the one person I was kind of telling you about, a wonderful person, any organization would die to have this person. This is what happened. Does anyone even notice I'm here? Does this matter? Like, why am I doing this? I don't, I guess I could probably not go and nobody had noticed. And then it happens once and no one says anything. So, like, oh, I'm not going to go again. And then all of a sudden they've disappeared. They've slithered away. It doesn't feel good to them. It doesn't feel good to the organization. It is not helpful. And it was a lost opportunity. So, here are some very easy steps you can start today to boost your leadership. Begin rounding. And what that means is just walk around, talk to your volunteers, and ask them what's going well. What ideas do you have to improve things around here? And just share one simple, very simple organizational update. Hey, we painted the door. It could be as simple as that. Or, we're getting new chairs or something like that. Just one idea that puts them in the know. And then document how these challenges are addressed with your volunteers. When you go out rounding, what are people saying? What could we do to improve things? What's going well? Write those down and track those. Three things is a trend, and I guarantee you will find trends where you either have to start doing those in other places or you have to address it to improve things. And then review your position descriptions for the impact and those volunteer motivational indicators. I got that rubric for you. Recruit volunteers to help recognize the great work of your volunteer team. We would ask a new volunteer to tell us about something good that you saw, and we want to hear about it. And then at a meeting, they'd have to tell about it. Or the other thing is, we would say, we want you to highlight find a volunteer, tell us about the good work that your other volunteers are doing. And then we would have a way of recognizing and rewarding these folks. The next thing, and I think this is so great in terms of building that in the know, the cohesion, and the confidence, build a 5-minute shift huddle. And I've heard these called lots of things, shift huddles, huddle helpers. shift updates. And it's just 5 minutes. Hey, you know what? These are the things that we're going to work on. I heard when we were rounding that people said the light keeps flickering. We're getting that taken care of. Somebody said this. I'm just making these things up. But we have these events coming up and we'd love to have your help if you're available, or just understand we've got a lot more traffic that's going to come in because we've got these events. Just a 5 minute quick update. They have questions, they can get that answered, and then you move on. I do have a format for that I'll share with you. And so, in summary, whew, that was a lot, wasn't it? Um, Trust is the foundation of your leadership. And I know that you do so many good things with your volunteers, but even when uh, you feel like something didn't go well, if you're talking with them, that trust usually supersedes things and you get a lot more of a pass when things don't go well. I've been there, trust me. uh, and so clarity also empowers you, it empowers your volunteers, and it gets people to do more for you. Communication must be intentional. Think about that, the one sentence, one action per sentence. I think that's pretty powerful. And then positive experiences drive retention. And that's what you want them to do. You want them to amplify how great your organization is. You want them to amplify and be great long-term ambassadors for your organization. And this brings us to the end of our slides. I want to thank you for being here. I want to give you a couple minutes if you'd like to hang on to answer any questions after I turn off the recording. But here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out. And I hope that you'll join us next week for our next webinar, which is called Ignite Your Recruitment: How to Spark the Word of Mouth Momentum amongst your volunteers, your funders, and your other supporters. So hopefully you'll join us for that. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. I think I'm going to stop the recording.